The movie opens with a honeybee flying peacefully when suddenly a wasp swoops down and stings it, killing it instantly. The scene cuts to our main character, Julia, who owns a small catering business. She's helped by her only employee, Paul. When they arrive at the venue for an evening garden party, Julia takes Paul's phone so he doesn't waste time and can focus on work. At the mansion, Julia meets Flora, the housemaid, and notices that the musician for the evening has already arrived and is setting up. While working, Sydney, the awkward son of the mansion's owner, sneaks up on Paul, drinking a beer. Sydney seems a little odd, like someone you'd avoid at a party. Sydney explains that his family doesn't actually live here. They just throw parties at the mansion sometimes. As they talk, Sydney's pet dog digs a hole in the garden, accidentally disturbing a huge underground wasp nest. One of the wasps comes out and stings Paul, tearing his pants. Frustrated, Paul runs to the van to change. As night falls, the guests begin to arrive. Big names are there, even the city mayor. Julia and Paul start serving food and drinks. While working, Julia unknowingly steps on the disturbed wasp nest from earlier. At first, nothing happens, but soon angry wasps start flying out. Paul manages to kill a few, but one lands on Sydney's shoulder, which he swats away. The wasps keep coming, and soon one guest is attacked by a swarm, getting stung repeatedly. The other guests gather around to check on him, but things turn horrific fast. A massive swarm bursts out of the ground, attacking everyone at the party. But these aren't normal wasps. Their sting isn't just poisonous. These mutated wasps lay eggs inside their victims with every sting. Moments later, the eggs hatch and giant wasp creatures burst out of the victims' bodies in the most gruesome way possible. The wasps weren't just killing people, they were using them as incubators. Some of the giant wasps still had human body parts attached to them, torn off limbs and faces hanging from their insect bodies. Paul witnesses one man's body being ripped open as a monstrous wasp erupts from his chest, leaving Paul horrified. He realizes the only way to survive is to cover himself and Julia with a tablecloth and run toward the house. But on the way, Julia gets distracted when she sees a woman's face being torn apart by a wasp bursting out of her mouth. Paul gets pushed, falls down, and drops the van keys nearby as the chaos continues. After bursting out of the woman's body, the giant wasp moves dangerously close to Paul, ready to attack. Luckily, its attention is still fixed on the woman's torn face, which is bizarrely stuck to its wing. Just before the wasp can lunge at Paul, Julia arrives and bravely kicks the wasp away, dragging Paul toward the house. Inside, Flora was calling for them to hurry. As she shouts, a wasp attacks her, but before it could sting, her pet dog runs out of the house, distracting the wasp, which chases after it. Flora takes the chance to slam the door shut, getting inside with Julia and Paul. At this point, there were only 3 other people left in the house: Sydney, his mother, and the town's mayor. Everyone was terrified, hoping it was just some nightmare. But nightmares aren't shared by multiple people. They needed a plan, and fast. With no phones available, Sydney remembers a landline phone in the house. But before they can use it, they see out the window that a wasp attacks a car driver outside. The driver loses control and crashes the car straight into a telephone pole, killing their only chance of communication. Through the car's broken window, they witness another horrifying scene: a giant wasp ripping out of a man's chest. Moments later, a terrified survivor appears outside a window, begging for them to let him in. But Sydney refuses, fearing the man might already be stung and could turn on them. As weird as Sydney had seemed earlier, it turns out he was smart enough to realize how dangerous it would be. Sydney insists the house isn't safe anymore. Their only option is the basement. They quickly start planning their move, but are interrupted by Flora's sudden screams. They rush to find Sydney's mother has attacked her. Turns out, Sydney's mother had also been stung, and now a giant wasp was beginning to burst from her body. Before it could fully emerge, Sydney kicks his mother away, and the group quickly retreats into another room, locking the door behind them. Flora, badly injured, sits near the door. Before anyone could react, a wasp stinger pierces straight through the wooden door, right into Flora's eye, stabbing deep into her head, killing her instantly. Everyone is in shock at the brutal death. Just as they try to pull themselves together, one of the wasp's legs breaks through the door, grabbing Paul. But Julia and the mayor react fast, stabbing the wasp with a knife and saving Paul. They immediately run toward the basement. As they flee, the giant wasp lets out a screeching sound, and suddenly hundreds of wasps swarm toward it. That's when they realize this is the queen. The group makes it to the basement and locks themselves inside. But now the question remains, are they even safe down here? Because something wasn't right with Sydney's body. Inside the basement, the mutated lump from earlier began to twitch violently. It was obvious now, another wasp was about to emerge. Sydney, who knew exactly what was happening, started confessing everything. He explained how he was born deformed and how his parents never cared for him. They had no idea how smart he actually was. Secretly, Sydney had been conducting twisted experiments for years, and this time, he added his self-made growth hormone into a fertilizer mix, causing the local wasps to mutate into these monstrous, human-sized killers. As Sydney was revealing these terrifying facts to the others, the lights went out again. It was shown that the wasps themselves had cut the power. Because their mutated bodies carried human brains, they could think strategically and act with intelligence. But cutting the power didn't help them much. A backup generator kicked in immediately, restoring light to the basement. Still, these signs of growing intelligence in the wasps terrified the group. They knew now that staying here wasn't an option. They needed to escape this cursed town. The problem? The keys to the van had been dropped outside. Who would risk going out there? Paul stepped forward, taking the responsibility. He crawled out carefully, grabbed the keys, and right then, he noticed Sydney's pet sitting nearby. Paul moved toward it, intending to save it, but before he could reach it, a human-sized wasp burst out of the pet's stomach. It immediately lunged at Paul. Desperate, Paul reached out blindly, his hand grabbing an ice pick lying in the dirt. He stabbed the wasp repeatedly until it collapsed, dead. Paul survived, barely. Back in the basement, the most disturbing scene so far was about to unfold. Sydney's body began to twitch uncontrollably, but unlike the others, because he was deformed, a normal wasp didn't emerge from him. Instead, a small, grotesque mutant wasp crawled out from his disfigured body. And it wasn't just any wasp. It was connected directly to his mind. The tiny creature slithered back into Sydney's ear. Within seconds, it took over his entire nervous system. Sydney's eyes snapped open, but he wasn't human anymore. His body moved with unnatural jerks, controlled by the creature inside him. A new nightmare had just begun. Just before Sydney could attack Julia and the mayor, Paul made a heroic entrance through the window, pulling off a stunt and knocking Sydney down. Sydney quickly tried to get up, but Paul swung his legs, sending him crashing across the room. Without wasting a second, the mayor and Paul grabbed a heavy shelf and toppled it over Sydney, finally putting an end to that nightmare. They were momentarily free, but the basement window was no longer an option. Wasps were swarming in from there. They hurried upstairs only to be horrified by what they saw. The wasps had turned the entire house into a hive. The ceilings, the walls, everything was covered. Moving cautiously, they decided to sneak their way out, but fate wasn't on their side. The mayor accidentally stepped on a wasp, and in an instant, it latched onto him. Julia and Paul tried to save him, but it was too late. The creature tore into the mayor. In a final, selfless act, the mayor let himself be devoured, giving the others a chance to escape. Now the wasps were after them. Luckily, they spotted a room nearby and rushed inside, slamming the door shut behind them. For the time being, they were safe. Exhausted, they crawled under a table to catch their breath, trying to gather their strength. As they whispered about what to do next, they grew closer, sharing a moment of quiet understanding in the chaos. But their peace was short-lived. A wasp broke through the door. It was about to strike when, at the last second, they tipped the table onto it, crushing the creature. Before they could even react, another wasp cracked the ceiling above them. Forced to move fast, they made a break for it and escaped through a wall the wasps had already smashed open. Now outside, they only had one goal: to reach their van. But it wasn't going to be easy. Hovering above was the queen. In a sudden swoop, she stabbed Paul in the shoulder with her stinger and began lifting him into the air. Julia, acting fast, grabbed a nearby rod and struck the queen repeatedly, finally breaking off her stinger. Enraged, the queen flung Julia aside with immense force. The queen began carrying Paul away. Julia could have escaped. She had the chance, but Paul's screams stopped her in her tracks. The queen dumped Paul in a corner of the hive where the rest of the captured humans were kept. Sydney was there too, but Sydney wasn't human anymore. He was now one of them, a mutated wasp hybrid. Pretending to help, Sydney pulled the stinger out of Paul's shoulder. But it wasn't an act of kindness. He wanted Paul alive, just enough to suffer. The queen handed Sydney a larva, and he moved in to plant it inside Paul's body. Just as he was about to complete his twisted mission, the sound of an electric saw cut through the room. Julia appeared, charging in like a final girl out for revenge. In one swift move, she sliced the wasp off Sydney's back and flung it aside. Then, using the same saw, she held off the queen, keeping her from getting to Paul. She grabbed the larva and hurled it away. Julia quickly helped Paul up, and they made a run for it. But the queen wasn't giving up. As she came after them, Sydney, now free from the wasp's control, grabbed the queen from behind in a last act of redemption. Enraged, the queen stabbed Sydney through the chest, killing him instantly. Julia and Paul made it to the van, Earlier, they'd opened several gas pipes in the house. Now was the time. Striking a match, they lit the place up. The house exploded in a massive blast, incinerating the entire hive and all the wasps inside. For a moment, it felt like it was finally over, but it wasn't. Out of the burning wreckage, the queen, engulfed in flames, lunged after them, clinging to the van. Thinking fast, Paul slammed the van into a tree, crushing the queen once and for all. The crash left Julia unconscious. Paul tried desperately to wake her, fearing she was gone, but just as he began to give up, Julia's eyes fluttered open, and she gasped for air. Rescue teams and police officers arrived just in time. They pulled the survivors from the wreck. Julia and Paul shared a kiss, thinking the nightmare was finally over. But as they turned to leave, a massive cow's severed head fell from the sky, crushing an officer. They all looked up in horror. From the distance, dozens of enormous mutant wasps were approaching. These weren't coming from the house. They were bursting out of the cattle's bodies nearby, just like they'd once infested humans. And as the screen slowly faded to black, one thing was clear: the nightmare was far from over. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned for more. The next chapter is just around the corner.